Yes, I was disappointed in one aspect of the paper, and that is the role of deliberation kind of got left out. And not only in the context of asymmetry of power, but of clashing ideologies or clashing groups. Think indigenous groups, think the situation in Peru with still a deep polarization in Peru. Which of these pathways offers the most promise with respect to a kind of deliberation which would play a role that's salutary?
Thanks. Michael, 5 minutes to respond.
They were wonderful comments. Thank you very much. I'll take them all. No, I write papers in a deliberative mode as well. And I mean that seriously. I mean, if any of the papers that I've written that have gone on to be relatively well cited in their first iterations were pretty scary. And but I keep backing my judgment that I'll subject myself to this kind of critique by people who, in their own way, know way more about particular elements of what I'm trying to piece together, and somehow we try and stitch it all together into something that is greater than the sum of those parts. So that's my second round task, and why I've saved my firepower from my consultant money for this paper for post this moment. Because when I start out with these things, often I'm not really sure even what I think. But I think it's Wordsworth that said, "How can I know what I think until I've seen what I've written?" So I write. That's what I think. It's a hard copy of my brain, and now we put it through this deliberative process, and I will take it to that next step. The fiction and development paper, that's just an article on what we learned about development from novels, as opposed to reading JP articles or books from Cambridge University Press. So the role of justice actually is a pretty consistent theme in a lot of the novels that people write about development. That's a footnote. A lot of what I think we do with Justice for Poor is to work at sort of multiple units of analysis with ourselves as third parties. The bank is trying ultimately, on a good day, to work to try and use its convening power to try and get different constituencies together, and to have at least in a lot of the work that we do around local level reform, trying to create that space for decisions to happen. And we only are able to function, and in terms of these questions of incentives and other things, we work in countries where there's potentially an unusual alliance between vice presidents, country directors, and in-country staff who recognize that questions of local dispute resolution and questions of legal pluralism, the questions of legal fragmentation, are binding constraint questions on them doing what they want to do. Maybe they have an intrinsic concern about justice in their heart because they think it's terrible that poor people are being ripped off. The really big way in which we've tried to be influential is to sort of look around orthodox development projects, roads, bridges, infrastructure, agriculture, land administration, stuff where change is inherently, almost by definition, part of what is trying to be brought about. But again, from a social theoretical perspective, you can't get any of that change without changing a prevailing political equilibrium. Empowering people by definition means that you're trying to reassert the political status and influence of a particular group, and not necessarily a zero-sum way, but you're pushing back against someone who likes it the way it is at the moment. So for the savvy country director who's trying to keep their life in order, but also trying to actually achieve what they're ostensibly there to do, these kind of issues are live issues. We're not doing this because we have actionability and traction with these particular countries, because country directors themselves who actually get out of their offices into the field and engage with these questions recognize that they are really crucial. If you're trying to do investments in these countries where there is no land law, you've got to try and figure out how to produce something that is minimally credible and just for people themselves, but also to parties that might be coming to actually do that kind of investing. So, our own story over the last 8 years has been a deliberative one of engaging with everyone from villagers through to regional vice presidents to try and persuade them that that this is an issue in its own right, it's an issue in an instrumental sense, and that engaging with this in a different kind of way, which ultimately involves taking context seriously, understanding as best you can, making the investments as best you can in understanding that context is a basic prelude to trying to figure out what might ever come next. The bigger question of whether there's a disjuncture between sort of a freeing up of elites from the rule of law at the same time as there is a resurgence of interest in this at the bottom. I don't know. Maybe that's true. Our mandate is to, at least as what we can do is work on these particular issues. I mean, I think there are other world social forums and other places where different kinds of politics, different kinds of strategies presumably might be needed to be brought to bear. I guess one of the advantages of reading, though, a lot of the history is just saying whatever challenges we think we face in the 21st century, they are pittance compared to what people. When you were going up against Charles I, who'd slaughtered 10% of his population, the odds of you succeeding in that sort of moment were unbelievably. No one had an incentive to challenge any of that. No one had it. So I take seriously the question of how we understand and engage with the political incentives. But at least from the big historical cases, most of the times it was just. It was people acting in spite of every incentive they faced to try and actually bring about a lot of that kind of change. So what I do think from an operational point of view, though, is really crucial is trying to figure out how you can get incremental, as Peter said, some of these incremental next steps incentivized and measurement of the attainment of them built into the way in which we work. I think that needs to be always juxtaposed with sort of figuring out the kind of trajectories of change that we're on. I think one of the other ludicrous things that characterize this business is the notion that we're all on some monotonically linear increasing progress chart, and if we haven't achieved something discernible over a 3-year period, then we've failed. Most of what we're doing here, I think, is probably a J-curve. It's sort of if you're messing with power, you're probably going to see a kickback against that, and a lot of the initial responses of succeeding might be actually that you've caused a lot of unhappiness for certain people, and so having a much richer engagement with these trajectories of change issues, both in the short run and the long run, and how you can build metrics of discerning that in real time as opposed to ex post looking back. I think that's a really important thing to try and figure out. I'll talk with Rick later on because I'm conscious that this is one of those areas that I'm getting into areas that I'm have no business in some sense being in, but I do have a business of being in it because I do have the task of trying to figure out how we keep moving our Justice for the Poor process forward. I think where I probably erred with the paper itself was sort of overly conflating sort of a rule of law discourse with the local justice discourse. I think certainly the way in which it's played out rhetorically in this place and in most other places, those two are sort of it's the invocation of believing that we're doing this as part of a broader package of contributing to the rule of law. Whereas, as you've said, and I think what we ultimately would say too, and in the countries they're working on is. The issue isn't rule of law per se, it's how do we get the land administration in Cambodia to work for poor people? How do we get public financial management systems in Mozambique to work in such a way that they plug the holes and people can't just take whatever they want out of the public pot? So it's usually a response to a particular sectoral issue, which has its own constituency of professionals and clients and others built around that. So for the purpose of the paper, because I concede happily that there's some truncation needed to get it from a big thing down to a manageable into a book thing, perhaps focusing on particular sectoral issues around which these pathways may or may not materialize is the right way to get at that. That's what I learned by being willing to put myself in this space, and that's how I learn. Thanks very much.